Hello, today is Wednesday, May 13th, and welcome to episode 595 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Jessica Jones. I'm joined today by founder and executive director Jamil Jaffer, and 2 of our favorite senior fellows, Andy Kaiser and Algene Sowdhury. All right, team, we are checking in today on the Iran-U.S. conflict and the current state of play when it comes to our numerous diplomatic efforts. As our audience knows, the U.S. has been negotiating with Iran, but President Trump, as he flew out to China, had some choice words, calling the Iran ceasefire as being on life support, discussing bringing back Project Freedom, which you guys might remember was a one-day effort to escort ships through the strait. We also had Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on Capitol Hill yesterday discussing the cost and strategy of the conflict. Articles suggest that he met some bipartisan frustration. So I want to hear from you guys what you honestly took of his testimony. The secretary also discussed munitions piles, the price tag, the long game when it came to the conflict. We discussed the $200 billion supplemental here on the show, and we have yet to hear more about it. So question mark there. And we also saw stories earlier this week that the UAE might be beginning to play a more active military role against Iran with drone and missile activity. So there's a lot going on potentially as the president heads out to China to meet with Xi Jinping. So Algene, I'm going to turn first to you. We had the secretary on the Hill discussing the cost, which seems to be growing every week. What do you make of his testimony? What do you make about the cost of this war so far?
Thanks, Jess. As you said yesterday, Secretary Hegseth estimated that Operation Equip Fury has cost approximately $29 billion. He said that the majority of the spending has been used for munitions, including Tomahawk and Patriot interceptor missiles. And those reserves have been severely depleted, right? And so now, just 2 weeks ago, Pentagon leaders told lawmakers that the cost of the war was $25 billion. So that's a $4 billion increase in just 2 weeks. And I think it's really important to note that it's just a guess because the new $29 billion figure estimate doesn't include the cost of repairs to U.S. facilities that have been hit by Iran. So the comptroller, Jay Hurst, Pentagon comptroller, told Senator Jack Reed that, quote, "We just don't have a good estimate at this time." So actually, indeed, some officials previously suggested that including the damaged equipment and installations, the true cost could be closer to $50 billion. And this is a significant political risk, I think, for the administration and for congressional Republicans, because they'll have to face an answer to voters this fall who are really unhappy with the war, and they're seeing the daily reminders of it at the gas pump and elsewhere, right? And so this new estimate comes with a historic, and some may argue are alarming, $1.5 trillion military budget request, and that's $500 billion more than last year's budget. And so the interesting part as well is that they're proposing to bypass Senate filibusters with the reconciliation process. And so that will be interesting to watch. The FY27 budget proposes a 10% overall cost to non-defense discretionary domestic spending on things like domestic health and human services, education, domestic agricultural and food security. And that's not even to mention the severe cuts in important international programs like the proposed 46% cut in life-saving global health programs. So I suspect Republicans in Congress will push back on this budget request as they did with the 2026 budget request. So a lot for Congress to consider at this time, and it'll be interesting how they respond to the American public's take on this war and the costs to their household budgets.
Thank you, Algene. As lawyers, we don't like to deal with numbers, so I'm glad you tackled that because I know Jamil doesn't want to. Jamil, I want to turn next to you for some maybe non-number discussion. What do you make about the developments as the president heads out to China to meet Xi Jinping?
Well, I do have a few numbers. Obviously, Iran has taken a significant hit on its ballistic missile launch and its drone launch capabilities. Their quantity of missiles and drones themselves are actually still pretty high, about a third of those left. But here's the new news. The problem is we just found out that Iran has actually restored access, whether they have capability or not, still yet to be seen, but restored access at least to 30 of the 33 missile launch sites. That's not great, right? Because if you've got missiles and now you're getting launch capability, that basically means that they have undone a significant chunk of what we did to them during this ceasefire. By the way, it's worth noting this ceasefire has been a complete joke because we did our part. We stopped attacking them. They didn't do their part and reopen the straits, as we've talked about repeatedly on this podcast. So what the president is doing with this blockade, fine, great, it's putting economic pressure on Iran. It's also keeping economic pressure on us because it allows their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz to continue. To your point, the president did finally get tired of it. He decided to open it up, and it lasted all of a day. It got shut down again. He wanted negotiations to go forward. He's now called his negotiations, to your point, a joke, or not working, or rejected their point of view. That means at some point the president's got to either decide start bombing again or open the Strait of Hormuz by force. He doesn't want to do either, and the Iranians know it, which is why they keep calling his bluff. So the great negotiator doesn't seem to know how to stop giving away his negotiating leverage. Hopefully, he figures that out before he arrives in China with Xi Jinping, because he's about to get the tables run on him again if he goes into the same thing with Xi Jinping and tries to float an idea on negotiating that doesn't have real backing behind it, which the Iranians knew and are now into. He can, by the way, at a moment's notice, change the game on the Iranians. All he has to do is start dropping bombs on Iranian military sites again, or send more destroyers and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. There are ships that will transit with us. He hasn't been ready to do that, or he said he was ready and then he didn't. So, now's your chance, Mr. President, reestablish leverage.
Okay, Andy, I want to get your take. We've joked here on the show whether this ceasefire was really a ceasefire, so I'd love to hear from you what you think about that and what next steps you see there, and maybe the stories about UAE getting more involved. How do you see that playing into the conflict?
Yeah, I do think Jamil has framed it well. We're, at something of an inflection point, but I think the Iranians are two things, right? They're a long-time historic power in the region. So they've been there for a long time. They're willing to wait. They've seen what the United States does throughout conflicts in the last 50 years. We exhibit incredible military capability for sure, and we've done that on the Iranians. I do think that's been undersold here, and the loss ratio is quite astounding. But as the New York Times noted this morning, and Jamil referenced the missile site access situation, it's very difficult to impose your will on someone strictly from the air. So we're seeing that. But the Iranians know they literally just have to kind of wait us out. We'll, whether it's this election cycle or another one, there's always one every 2 years behind it. The patience of the American people is fickle, and as Algene noted, the public wasn't particularly brought on early to this operation, so their level of support is thin. I am very interested in this UAE escalation. I do think that's significant. You see the Emiratis launching attacks inside Iran with their own fighter jets, their own surveillance and reconnaissance and targeting. I'm sure we're providing a lot of assistance, but I'm guessing that's very welcome in this administration. The president likes to talk about burden sharing. You're seeing Emirati pilots willing to take some risk, though of course we've reduced that risk greatly by wiping out the Iranian air defense systems. But still, nonetheless, you're seeing some of this burden sharing, which I do think is significant. And it does feel to me like you could see a situation where the power sharing starts to change in the region from what we've had historically to maybe more aggressive Emiratis, slightly more aggressive Saudis, though they've actually been quite tepid in this response, dealing much more directly with the Israelis and creating a new balance of power that sort of leaves the Iranians out. I think that's the optimistic picture the United States is hoping to paint after all this is concluded. But as anything with these, we'll have to wait and see. And of course, the enemy gets a vote.
We all get a vote. This is a democracy. Thank you, team. That's a wrap. Thanks so much to Grace Trice, Claude Jennings, and the entire NSI staff for their help in producing today's episode. Join us again on Friday, May 15th for another episode of Fault Lines, NSI's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debate shaking up America. We're on YouTube. Check out a video of today's episode. And if you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.